Hello, it's your boy, the one and only Sir Patrick of the Department of Biology. First things first, I would like to flex my very cool Cordillera themed mask. No? I bought it here in Baguio. Ganda yan, di ba? Terno pa siya sa aking checkered na damit. But yeah, I know it's been quite a while since the last lecture that we had here in Biosystematics. I think it's been a month or so since lecture 2. And then you all know Sir Dane took over, and now you're having your exam. But this video is for our lecture 5. So we're now moving on to the next chapter of our life in the sense of finding a meaning and sense in this world. And lecture 5 is titled The History of Life, that now we're looking for the patterns. History of life, looking for that certain pattern. And so, if you still have not taken your exam, stop right now, end this video, and go to your older lectures and start reviewing them. So you're prepared for the upcoming exam, okay? So, yep. If you have finished your exam, you can now proceed to watch this video. And yep, stay cool. History of life, looking at the pattern. So in this lecture, most of the time, we'll talk about phylogeny. So what is phylogeny anyway? When we say phylogeny, it pertains to a certain degree of, the evolutionary history of organism or a group of organisms. And usually, it shows a pattern of descent of these groups of organisms. When we say descent, we mean the transfer of genetic material from parents to the offspring over time, through several generations. And when we talk about the history of life, aside from the keyword descent, we'll also talk about the word lineage. When we say lineage, it pertains to a set of interconnected organisms through time and space. So when we talk about phylogeny, 3 things should come into mind: the evolutionary history of the organism, the pattern of descent, meaning the transfer of genetic material from parents to offspring, and 3, lineage, the set of interconnected organisms, like a line of organism that is interconnected through time and space. That's profound. Okay, so that's phylogeny. But what do we really mean when we say phylogeny, evolutionary tree, phylogenetic tree, or cladogram? What's the difference between them anyway? Well, to start, all of them are structures that represent a certain evolutionary relationship within a group of organisms. However, when we say cladogram, you emphasizes that the structures that you're showing are only a hypothesis of the actual evolutionary history of that organism, of that group. So when you draw a cladogram, you make it look like something like this, no? So it looks like something like that, but much more beautiful. So your cladograms are the least informative way of depicting the phylogenetic tree. All it shows is that these terminal species, so say for example species A, species B, and species C, so these species are assumed to be related. No? Here, the branch length, the length of these branches does not mean anything. They are only an arbitrary length. No? Usually, too, in your cladograms, in your dendrograms, all of the species are aligned or flush at the end of your cladogram, no? So they are flush, no? Pantay-pantay sila dyan sa point na yan. Okay? So that's your cladogram, no? The branch length here, the length of this here does not mean anything. It only shows that these terminal species are somewhat related. Okay? However, when you draw a phylogram or your phylogenies, your phylogenetic tree, the branches here mean something. Usually when you do a tree like this, you make it look like something like this. Okay, I'll draw it. So say for example, it looks like this. So this is your pilogram. Usually in your pilogram, you will also see something like this, a scale bar. So it say for example 0.7. Medyo ano, pangit. But anyway, it looks something like this. When you draw a pilogram, the branch length, no, the length of each branch means something. These lengths are actually proportional to how many character changes have occurred to your organism or to that group, for example. And there is always the presence of what we call scale bar. So usually this scale bar would infer some changes, no? A millimeter or a certain length would mean certain number of changes in your sequences or in your characters of that organism. Usually, also, your pilogram does not end flush, no? Hindi sila pantay-pantay dito sa dulo. Okay? Because those branch lengths means something. For example, some organism change, no? It doesn't change at all through its lifetime. So it doesn't incur so much changes in its character. That's why it is shorter. Or if it's rapidly changing, or it has many changes in its sequences or in its characters, it would have a longer branch length. So something like that, okay? So compared to your cladogram, your pilograms are not ended flush, no? Hindi sila pantay-pantay. Your cladogram usually pantay-pantay at walang what you call this scale bar, okay? So that's the difference between them. So while your pilogram shows the evolutionary relationship between the different groups of animals, cladograms gives a certain hypothetical picture of the actual evolutionary history of the organism. So a certain hypothesis lang. So we're all familiar with this three domain of life, the bacteria, the archaea, the eukarya, and we're part of the eukarya group. So that's the tree of life. I have been fortunate enough to have looked upon the different tree of life that is out there. You can look them up. It's currently still being updated up to this point, and there are a lot of organisms being discovered and being updated in the database to show the different lineages of organism. No? But basically, we have three domains of life: your bacteria, your archaea, and your eukarya. And these classifications are ever changing, actually. No? That's the cool thing about the science of systematics. But before we discuss how to construct certain trees like this, how to construct phylogenies, it is important to learn how to read and interpret what exactly does this tree mean. Okay? It is important how to learn and interpret them. But this process, no, is particularly challenging and a daunting task, especially for noobs like us. No? So how do we exactly read these trees? Well, first, we simply have a sense 8. I mean, a sense of the past and the recency of the organism. Usually, we have a sense of the recency and the past of organism. We have a trend, okay? We usually have a trend when we are reading the trees. The trend is usually you can also convert it into a landscape format, but the trend will always be you have the most, no, the old ancestors, the past, and the descendants, which are your extant members. When we say extant, living members of that taxa, for example. Okay? So that's it. The first thing you have to notice is you need to have a sense of the past and the recency of your organism. And the trend is always like that, past to recent. Okay? And next is it also shows us the shared and unique history of organism, like how organism B and C, no, how organism B and C share a common shared history. No? Although they also have their own unique history, they share a common history back here. Okay, that's the meaning of this connection right here, this branch right here. Okay, so taxon B and C, as you can see here, are actually sister groups sharing a common ancestor right here. Okay, while taxon A is more or less an outgroup of these three right here that we're seeing. But of course, A, B, and C also share a common ancestor right here. No? But it's a more distant common ancestor. So that's also a thing here, no? You also have to notice that there is what we call a recency of your ancestors. So what you can see here, what you can actually point out in this tree is you have a certain point in here and a certain point in here too. All the organism that is present here, here, and here are common ancestor of B and C, taxon B and C. While organisms that are here, here, and here, although they might be dead or extinct right now, are common ancestors of all your organisms in this tree, all these taxa. But as you can see here, these ancestors are much more recent than the ancestors in here. That's the meaning of this, the length of these branches here. That would mean that, okay? So as you can also see here, there is this point, no, this circle point that I have already told you. Pay attention to that because those are what we call nodes or points of speciation. That's why, so say for example, at this point in life, your organisms are exactly the same. They are one organism. So many ancestors, and then at this point of your evolutionary history, they diverge or speciate into these two groups. And then later on, this group became A, while the organisms in this group again had an event of speciation and then bifurcated again into taxon B and C later on in life. Okay, so that's the thing you need to watch out in this tree. That's how you read them actually. The next one is what we already discussed earlier. We should take note of what we call nodes, no? Yung kaninang pinoint out natin. Nodes on our tree sometimes represent the presence of a common ancestor for the organism that shared that node. So for example, this node right here and this node right here is a common ancestor. So the node here is a common ancestor of B and C, while the node here is a common ancestor of A, B, and C. But this is a more recent ancestor, as we have said earlier. And of course, the lines here also has points in it, no? And that represents the unique ancestors of C. Also, there are points here that represents the unique ancestors of B and also of A. Okay? What do we mean when we say ancestry? When we talk about ancestry, we usually mean of the origin. So the origin of your B and C, taxon B and C right here. So usually when we say ancestry, we mean that two or more lineages, so for example, lineage B and lineage C, may have descended or have been a descendant of your common ancestor right here. No? It's a relationship that is based on the recency of your common ancestor actually. That's ancestry. So when we're talking about nodes, there are usually two types of nodes that you have to notice. No, there are the external nodes. So what do we mean by external nodes? That's the node right here, and right here. So that's a point right here. Those are your external nodes. Your external nodes, so the point here, here, and here are your external nodes. Those represent your extant taxa, no? The taxa that you are studying at the moment. And we also have what we call the internal nodes. When we talk about the internal nodes, we are looking at the nodes right here and nodes right here. Okay? So the nodes right here and the nodes right here. Those are your internal nodes. So your external nodes are so for example, your external node are your extant or terminal species, your existing members of that taxa, while your internal nodes are point of speciation or divergence of your organism. That's your speciation events. And they actually also represent your ancestral species. That's your internal nodes. And also, there are a special type of internal node which are your root. No? But not all phylogenetic tree must be rooted. No? Pay close attention to that. Not all are rooted trees. But for the case of the trees that we're going to study, we have a rooted tree. When we say root, no, it's a special type of internal node which represent the ancestor of all the taxa in your tree. No? It's a special type of internal node actually. The cool thing about here is you will also notice that there are different internodes. No? These internodes are, well, ancestor species then of your organism, but much more recent. Other things you need to notice in this tree is what we call the crown group. So usually we have a crown group which are composed of your extant taxa that are much more related to each other. So when we're using a nested phylogenetic tree, and we also have the stem group. No? So this is your stem group right here, which are extinct groups, no? Extinct organism that is closely related to your crown group. Okay? And usually we also pertain to what we call outgroup. So outgroup, crown group, the stem group right here. And this, all of them are total group when you add all of them together. So crown group, outgroup, total group. Okay? When we talk about the crown group, usually and most specifically, we'll talk about them here. These are the organisms that you are focusing on. That's why you have a certain space for them. And we also need to include the crown outgroup for our study because we need to, well, compare them against each other. Say, for example, the differences in their sequences or their characters. No? So how will you say this is a group? You compare it to an outgroup, a separate outgroup. If they branch out in a different pattern like this, you can say, and if this is a statistically backed or with a bootstrap value, you can call them a certain group. Okay, moving on. How to consider which is a clade or not. But first, what is clade anyway? So clade is, well, a group, no? And a clade is a lineage based on genealogy. When we say genealogy, it pertains to ancestors plus the descendants. And of course, your clade, no, for example, this is also, no, that's why it's grouped like this. Your grouping, your clade, is actually based on certain characters. No, it is based on homology. And the members of your clades are homogeneous or maybe heterogeneous, but the members are always nested. No? When we say nested, they are fully contained in something or fully contained within something. Something of the same kind. That's why we call them a clade. Okay ba yan? So when we say clade, we pertain on the lineage or the groupings that is based on homology and genealogy of the organism. So the ancestor descendant and the homology of the characters. And usually your clades are nested or contained in a box with the same kind. So how to consider which is a clade and which is not clade? So as you know, clade is a grouping that should include a common ancestor and all of its descendants, living and both extinct of that ancestors. So as you can see here, this is a clade because it includes the extant member and the dead members or your extinct member of this group. No? It should contain the common ancestor, the ancestors, and the descendants of that group. So this is a clade. This is also a clade because it is a group that contained your extant member and the not so extant member of that group. And this is not a clade because, why? As you can see here, if you consider this point, it contains all the extant member plus the common ancestor of this group. But when you include this point here and you call this a group, that is not a clade because you did not include all the extant member of this group, and you did not include the ancestor for this group. You did not include this, and this. So it's not a clade. Also, that's true for this part because you did not include this portion. So what are examples of this? Well, you can look them up in the internet. There are a lot of groupings that are so wrong. This will be part of your reading. So as you have already seen in our study guide, we have what we call monophyletic, paraphyletic, the phyletic phyletics. Okay, so you need to read them to understand this concept more. But essentially, they talk about the groupings, no, of this organism. Say for example, your algae. Your algae are a polyphyletic group, meaning they did not evolve from a single common ancestor. It is something like this, no? It includes organism or something like this. It includes organism from other clades or other taxa that are not involving all the common ancestors in them. You will learn more of it when you have read our readings. But essentially, those are groupings of your organism. What we love is to have all of them, all of these groupings that we're having now, is to be monophyletic. We love monophyletic group because they are rigid. They are based on a certain rigid description of all of its ancestors and its genealogy. We have an exercise right here. So is this a clade? Yes or no? Is that your final answer? Yes, it's a clade. This is also a clade. And this is also a clade. Because it is a grouping that contains all the extant members, the living members of the group, and also contains all the common ancestors, and common ancestors, maybe recent or not so recent, of the entire group. Okay, so that's the thing to practice here. Okay, so super easy up to this point, don't you think? Still super easy. So now we're moving on to what we call the phylogenetic pitchfork. So we all know that branching pattern of your phylogenies provide information about the relationship between organisms. But sometimes it could happen that phylogenies include polytomies, no? Or nodes with more than two descendant lineage, creating what we call a phylogenetic pitchfork. No? It looks like a pitchfork for the field or for the mob when they're going to lynch certain vampire or I don't know monsters. I haven't joined some lynch group. But anyway, so it's a pilogenetic pitchfork. So if you look at this, no, at this image, look at that. It doesn't give you anything at all. No? There's no information in this pitchfork, in this image. All I can see is that they're all related, but I can't infer which is more related to A or to B or to C. Because at this point, they are all equally related. It's a nonsense, actually, no? It's a node on your phylogeny where four more lineages, these lineages right here, descended from a single ancestral lineage. And you can't figure out which is more recent, which is more related, and so on and so forth. Well, this can only mean one of two things. The first one, well, this polytomy may include that either that we don't know how the descendant lineages are related because of the lack of knowledge, or that we think that these descendant lineages speciated simultaneously. That's the two explanation. So one, the lack of knowledge. Since we don't have so much knowledge on this organism, we tend to create a very vague phylogenetic tree of them, where they are all equally related to each other. Usually, this is the reason, since when we don't have enough data, we can't, well, figure out or scrutinize how the lineages came to be. The second possible explanation is rapid speciation. Of course, no? When you have a rapid speciation or multiple speciation events happening at the same time, in that case, you have a very much aligned groupings since they speciated simultaneously. So all the daughter lineages that you can see here are equally or closely related to one another. For example, no? For example, here you have a cladogram that shows the phylogenetic relationship among the members of a fish group called the cichlids, no? Yung mga kamag-anak ng tilapia, which is, well, they quite speciated very quickly after their home, no, their home lake formed in Africa. So resulting in several phylogenetic polytomies. So that's the thing with rapid speciation event, no? You can't discern which came first since they speciated simultaneously. So that's the thing here. Ganyan na ganyan yung makikita nyong trees in your speciation event, in your Precambrian explosion or Cambrian explosion. No? The rapid speciation event back then ng mga snails. But way back in time. So that's your phylogenetic pitchfork. And you can actually, well, you can resolve them in various form like this. So yung pitchfork kanina, you can resolve it in different ways, in different combination. But how do you do that? Is, well, often you need to gather more data to resolve this polytomy. And there are many solutions to that. So all you need really is to do research. Diba? Ba't kayo research ng research? Aanuhin nyo ba yung research? Anyway, okay. Now we're moving on to this next slide. I'd like you to take your time and look at this slide. It's a very cute slide of your Lego man. So there's the pitchfork that I was talking about here. He has a spear. I don't know what is that, a clay tablet or something, and drill and a computer. And then this is probably a monkey, and then a very haired man. Okay, so, well, this is the thing about evolution. No? More often than not, people, when they hear the concept of evolution, they have this preconceived notion that we came from monkeys or a less evolved form, no? A hairy form of us back then. Yes, we're all familiar with this version of human evolution. wherein a primitive looking thing give rise to a slightly less primitive thing, giving rise to another and then another, and finally something like us, something so advanced. We call this a march of progress. Well, that isn't how evolution works. This is actually a misconception. This gradistic way of looking at evolution is flawed, no? Evolution is not a graded step. It's not a step ladder. No? This idea that we are this inevitable walk to be the successful dominant species is flawed, no? Where you acquire an ability and become X-Men mutant, and don't even get me started with the Pokemon when they evolve. Well, this idea of evolution, no? That we are this inevitable walk towards success or to be a dominant species is a flawed idea, no? We are not above these species, no? We are not greater than them. I would like you to take a deep look into this, because guys, we are not the center of the world. Keep your head down the ground. Don't be a narcissist. Not everything is about you. Species around you did not exist for you. The chicken joy that you ate later that day did not exist for you. Well, this is not entirely your fault. The Bible specifically says that we are to govern and rule all of his creation, all of this God's creation, no? Diba sabi nga, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea, the birds in the air, over every living creatures that moves on the ground. Diba sabi ng Bible? And that's exactly the same thing that led to the colonizers to justify their action. That's why for me, I'm more akin to the indigenous people's view of the world. That we are just a mere member. We are not here to govern them or subdue them. We are a member just like them. We are a citizen of this world, this earth, no? That we are just a mere member of the land. And we are no better than the animals, no? And the plants that are in here, we do not own them or rule them. We are just as free as they are free. Because phylogeny and evolution isn't a tree that grows to a march towards some ideal best species. We are a slave to time, following the landscape carved out by natural selection. And always, no, we are always at the threat of extinction and at the mercy of current, at the mercy of nature, at the mercy of space. Being complex and advanced doesn't mean you are successful as a species. If the purpose of evolution is for survival of the species and for continuity of life, I would say the most successful organism on Earth would be the bacteria. If say we go extinct by some catastrophic event, they will continue the life for us, the bacteria, and start the whole process of evolution again. If the purpose of life is to exist and to continue existing, then all forms of life that we see now, no, these all forms of life that is around us, every insect, every plant, every animal, and every microbes, every shape and form, are as successful and as equal in the eyes of evolution and natural selection. Because these forms, keep that in mind, all these forms are still here. They are still surviving, meaning they are good enough for nature. They are still existing, still fighting the disorder, no? This entropy. I'd like to think of life as a continual struggle and a protest against the environment, against the harsh world, a continual struggle against the entropy and death. That we are continually being chased down. We are this struggle. Life is this struggle, and you should be proud of that. And when you see that in the face, you could say, well, we had a nice run, huh? Hadn't we? Good game, and then reboot and start again, respawn as a new species. So yeah, keep in mind that these phylogenetic trees are not ladders. They are not a stepwise increase in complexity. No? They are not graded ladders, no? Grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. No. you can arrange them in any form because they are topologically the same, as you can see here. No, doesn't mean that this rose species is more advanced than the rest. Doesn't mean that, because all of